Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. I am your host, Lena, and I'm so glad to be back here with you again today for another episode. We are continuing with our reading of Michael's book, Dancing the Dream, and we are now on both episode and piece number 22. As has been the case the last few weeks, this week we are continuing to talk about the big things in life. This week we have another short reflective piece by Michael, and it is titled God, a little talked about subject. God is clearly a theme that has come up in so many of the pieces in this book. So considering that, having a piece entitled God, this is hopefully going to give us some real insight on Michael's own perspectives about God. And I'm looking forward to it. So sit back, relax, get comfy, get cozy, and join me for this reading and discussion of Michael Jackson's God. God. It's strange that God doesn't mind expressing himself/herself in all the religions of the world, while people still cling to the notion that their way is the only right way. Whatever you try to say about God, someone will take offense, even if you say everyone's love of God is right for them. For me, the form God takes is not the most important thing. What's most important is the essence. My songs and dances are outlines for him to come in and fill. I hold out the form. She puts in the sweetness. I've looked up at the night sky and beheld the stars so intimately close, it was as if my grandmother had made them for me. How rich, how sumptuous, I thought. In that moment, I saw God in his creation. I could as easily have been her in the beauty of a rainbow, the grace of a deer bounding through a meadow, the truth of a father's kiss. But for me, the sweetest contact with God has no form. I close my eyes, look within, and enter a deep, soft silence. The infinity of God's creation embraces me. We are one. So I kind of joked there at the beginning, we never talk about God. Obviously, we talk about God all the time on this podcast because God comes up all the time in this book. I love that Michael has a dedicated space to addressing the topic of God. God is a funny topic because depending on how you were raised, depending on your religious background and your upbringing, God and the very topic and concept of God can sometimes feel like it only belongs to certain people who identify as religious in one form or another, people who were raised with a certain doctrine of what God means and who God is and what God is. I myself was raised Christian, but do not identify as a Christian now. For a while, though, I struggled with my spiritual identity because of some negative associations with religion as I had come to know it. I know a lot of people who feel this way. a lot of people who associate religion and God. And if the religion has harmed you in some way, or if the practices or beliefs or individuals who support that religion have harmed you in some way, it can create a kind of distancing from not only the religion, but from God himself. So what I love about this piece is the way Michael is straight up acknowledging that. He's saying directly, it's strange that God doesn't mind expressing himself or herself in all these religions of the world, but that people insist on there being one right or wrong way. And I think about that and how so many different religions simultaneously existing. And it makes me want to consider more, what exactly is religion? I mean, of course I know what religion is. I guess what I mean is there any reason why all religions cannot be true simultaneously? I would suggest that that's what Michael thinks, based on what he's written here, that if God is expressing himself or herself, God is taking shape in many different forms that can reach people from all walks of life and all corners of the earth, then God is accessible to everyone. But with that, of course, comes the rules and doctrines of each religion. I remember as a child seeing the movie The Mummy, and there's a scene toward the end where a mummy is coming after one of the characters, and he is terrified. And so he starts lifting up every single cross and chain and everything he has hanging around his neck from all these different religions of the world. And he starts praying back to back in each religion or toward and for each religion. And that always made me laugh because I had this idea, and I still do, I guess, that to be a participant in a religion means you must have complete faith in just that religion, not in the higher power itself, but the specific way that particular religion operates. And I do wonder about that, because it would seem to me that religion is simply a methodology for understanding God. And there's different methodologies to doing that. And there are some that work best for different cultures or different groups of people. But I think the best of religions are ones that are open, not overly constricting. It's funny because in a lot of ways, this is actually a difficult episode to record because, like Michael says, whenever you talk about God, someone could take offense. And that could even just be saying that there's no wrong way to see God. So if you give equal validity to every religion out there, you're bound to offend some people. I find this especially interesting coming from Michael, who obviously was a very faith-driven person. We've seen this already in the writing that we've looked at. But was he a religious person? Absolutely, in certain periods of his life he was. But I'm not sure that he was always religious, because what's the difference between being religious and honoring God or believing in God? I think there's a significant difference, actually. I'm thinking about how, I guess about a year ago at this point, I attended one of Brad Sundberg's In the Studio with MJ seminars, and I attended it in New York City. And at that seminar, he had the guest speaker, Brad Buxer. For those of you who are not familiar, Brad Sundberg was an audio engineer that worked with Michael Jackson throughout his career from the mid-'80s to the early 2000s, both in the studio, but also he worked at Neverland as well to do like sound, audio engineering and whatnot. And Brad Buxer, who was his guest star, was a frequent collaborator of Michael's. He was someone who worked to write and compose songs with him. He also worked with him on tour. And he also has said more than once that Michael was his best friend. And that's all very interesting, right? Because like I said in one of the previous episodes, friendship is kind of funny. You can never really know what a true friendship was like without both sides, you know? But according to Brad B., they were very close. And during the seminar, someone asked a question about Michael's relationship to God or religion. And Brad said that Michael confided in him his true feelings and that he didn't want to upset anyone by sharing them. Now, I don't know what that means. I feel like that is a heavy implication and would imply that Michael was not religious and perhaps even questioned the existence of God. However, we can't know what's true. What we can know is that Michael frequently wrote about God in ways that convey a very significant spiritual relationship to God, a significant influence in his life from God, and that he lived his life trying to emulate the teachings of Jesus and of serving God as best as possible. Now, obviously we know he was a Jehovah's Witness growing up and presumably left the church in the late 1980s. But we don't really know after that if there was ever truly one religion that Michael ascribed to. We just know he remained faithful in some way because God continued to come up throughout his life. But I think it's pretty evident here that it doesn't really matter what Michael believed when it came to religion. If there was some religion or another that he most identified with as he grew older. Because as he says here, for me, the form God takes is not the most important thing. What's most important is the essence. So with that said, let's leave the form, aka the religion, behind for now. Let's leave it behind. And let's think about the rest of what he said. In the last paragraph, Michael goes on to say that looking up at the night sky, he felt as if his grandmother had made the stars for him. And in thinking about that, we could take that literally in terms of his actual grandmother, imagining a direct ancestry of his bloodline and imagining his ancestors living in the cosmos and kind of formulating the life and the beautiful experience he has in a way we might think of angels, for example. But we could also think of that crediting his grandmother as his way of saying, kind of like people often refer to God as a father. I wonder if imagining this direct lineage and relationship to the universe. I mean, he clearly, throughout this entire piece, does not ascribe to the idea of God being one gender. He goes back and forth between him and her. It's hard for human beings to conceive of something existing without a gender, which is evident in a lot of gender debates we have today. But it seems that Michael was comfortable recognizing that there may not be one gender or one static gender to encapsulate God. And so to say his grandmother was the one behind these stars could be about his actual grandmother, but it could be a way of conveying a great appreciation on a spiritual level for his relationship to God, whoever he or she is. He goes on to mention how he sees God in all of these natural moments and creations, a rainbow, a night sky, affection from a father. I'm thinking about how a couple of weeks ago with a few of my classes, we spent the day outside. It was absolutely beautiful. The weather was perfect. And we spent about 15 or 20 minutes outside. And the assignment was simply for students to sit and notice. Notice whatever. There's no right or wrong answer, but to notice and to jot down what they notice in a notebook. And as I introduced this assignment, I talked about how incredible it is to consider that both the universe is this infinite thing where we don't know what goes beyond the stars. We don't know what goes beyond the galaxies and how we ended up here. There is an infinite amount of possibilities. But then I also said that the same could be said about the earth itself when we zero in on a micro level of what's happening here. And I thought about how whenever I see an anthill, for example, there are ants crawling around, I feel overwhelmed thinking about the anthill and how incredible it is that there are a million little ants crawling around, doing their work, carrying heavy loads, serving a greater purpose. And it means the world to them. That small anthill means the world to them, whatever they are creating inside of it, and how that is happening simultaneous to us right now, everywhere on earth. Everywhere on earth, there are micro moments and micro ecologies and micro galaxies, we could think of it that way, that have their own infinities. And how incredible of a thought this is. And when you approach life that way, as Michael has said in previous pieces, when you approach life where everything is miraculous, then everything is miraculous. And God is in everything because there's something behind it. There's some explanation behind everything, whether we know the explanation or not, or we're confident in the explanation we have or not. There's something behind it all. And so what Michael describes here, I think, is the ability to see that and recognize it. So when he says, I close my eyes, look within, and enter a deep, soft silence, the infinity of God's creation embraces me. We are one. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Because if the ability to see it is what is paramount to knowing God, then God is inside of everyone, right? I mean, that's the way I interpret his words. The connection to God is something that you can find and access at any time through yourself and through your own awareness. It is not something that exists inside of churches or temples or mosques or anywhere else. It's something that must exist within you, and you can either access it, and if you cannot access it, then you can learn to. That's the way I interpret Michael's understanding of God here and his exploration of God. And I personally love this. I think this is an inclusive and freeing way of viewing life, of viewing the world. It's very difficult, I would imagine, to be negative about existence when you see the work of God everywhere. And realistically, if you're really thinking about the fact that all of this exists somehow, then everything we see, everything we touch and feel and smell and taste, everything is the evidence of God. What's interesting is that these are the kinds of musings that if I had had them 10 or 15 years ago, I would feel uncomfortable because I was uncomfortable with the concept of God, because for me, God had to equate to a religion. And so the more I have personally felt freed from religion, the closer I have actually felt to God. And I do wonder if that was the same for Michael as well. if releasing himself from what maybe felt at some points like a constraining relationship to God through the various religions that he explored, if releasing that led to a stronger relationship to God to begin with. I know that's happened for me. I'm sure that's happened for others. But this is not, of course, to in any way disrespect or diminish people's religious affiliations and beliefs. I think that, as Michael says, any avenue through which someone can connect to God or feel access to God, that is not a bad thing. That is a good thing. But this is where, as he also says, everyone's love of God is right for them. And I would add to that is also evolving all the time. I think a previous episode pretty recently I asked the question, I wonder what his spiritual evolution was in terms of his belief systems, his feelings of closeness to God. Is it something he had truly felt since he was a child, or is it something he harnessed much later? These are questions we may never know the answers to, but Dancing the Dream as a book, as a whole, is an incredible insight into that. I mean, an incredible way of learning about this man who gave so few interviews in his life, and those he gave did not have the opportunity to really explore and express himself. This book is such a gift for us to be able to understand more about him. So I want to thank you for joining me once again for this conversation on God and on Michael and his own perspectives that he brings to the conversation. I am, as always, grateful to him for giving me a language through which I can understand these concepts a little bit better. I admire this man. I admire the way he lived. I admire what he stood for. I admire his spirit and his generosity and his creativity and his goodness. So learning about the driving forces behind that is really an exceptional thing. So thank you. And join me again next week for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson as we hit our halfway point in the book. Until then, take care and enjoy the night sky.